Thank you. So again, thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you to the organizers for allowing me to be on the panel. I guess I had to go through a competitive process too. So, I thought I was submitting a small paper and somehow I've ended up in a plenary. Let's see, there we go. I'm also particularly glad to be back in South Africa. I was first here in Stellenbosch 24 years ago and in Cape Town 22 years ago for the Conference on Public Communication of Science and Technology. We heard yesterday about cultural connections, and I particularly remember a performance by the iClipse group about the eclipse that was happening at that time of that meeting, showing us the cultural memories of the time and of the community. As you can see, it was a long time ago. My hair and my beard are a different color. But I want to point especially to the fact that in the photo, you can see my name tag. You can see the thing that holds the name tags up. It was a beaded one, like the one I'm using now. I had just recently started wearing reading glasses at that time and was still trying to figure out what does one do with glasses. And that struck me as the perfect thing for being able to hold my glasses. And so I started using them. But I'm pretty hard on my clothes. I tear them, I rip them, I break them. And so I broke those things, those beads fairly often. So I have to thank Marina for basically having a standing order that anytime she was going to see me at a meeting, she brought me some new ones. Just a couple days ago, she got me another set of new ones. But this does mean that I'm constantly reminded about South Africa because I wear these beads every day. I get asked about them frequently when people say, "Oh, I love your beads." I say, "I got them from South Africa." So anyway, I'm very glad to be here. Is Rick here yet? There he is. You may also notice Rick over on the side of that photograph.
You at least have hair left.
What I want to do today is ask a question about public engagement, about our goals. Something we heard about goals and we heard about success yesterday from John. And I want to talk about public engagement, perhaps in a slightly different way than we often do, but to figure out what do we think the goals of public engagement are, and particularly if it involves some kind of basic or discovery science. So the term public engagement is in fact, the general term that gets used by the community. Some people still use outreach. Most of us in this room say, well, that's not quite what we mean. We mean something a little more complex than that. It's the word that gets used by editorials in Science magazine, like the one that's shown there, which was written by Alan Leshner, who was then the publisher of Science. He's now retired. He was at that 2002 meeting here in South Africa, and I think it's actually where he was introduced to some of the more complex ideas and the richness of public engagement. And he made it one of the signatures of his time as the leader of AAAS and Science magazine. An earlier term, public understanding of science, coming from the Royal Society's 1985 report of that name. But now if you go to the Royal Society page, what they say is public engagement. I looked just to see what would South Africa would have, and there it's science engagement. And that's actually a slightly interesting change, the shift from science to public, which we might want to come back to. But as we know, public engagement is a very complex thing. Again, thanks to the work of Marina. Is Corrine here? Oh, there she is. And Corrine and Peter Weingart. This very comprehensive article on the many meanings of public engagement. I want to focus particularly on the one that the NRF puts on that webpage on science engagement. Where they say engagement is by definition a two-way process involving interaction and listening with the goal of generating mutual benefit, mindful of global shifts and imperatives and so on. It's that mutualness that is the key that I think we particularly want to be paying attention to. And in particular, a lot of the scholarly work where the term public engagement emerges from, which comes from the late 90s, around 2000, was about having an impact on the governance of science, on who makes decisions, not just with science information, but about science itself. The idea, sometimes it was called in the book on the right, See Through Science by Lewenstein and Willis, they called it upstream engagement. You want to have public engagement happen as early as possible so as to have impact on the decisions that scientists make. Impact not just on public opinion or public actions or public behaviors, but impact on the science itself. What research priorities do the scientists choose? What options do they pursue? How do they think about some of the inevitable choices that you have to make in the scientific process? It's not that citizens or publics would determine the outcome of the scientific work, but they would determine the questions and sometimes the methods and sometimes the choices and so on. This perspective got picked up and is in policy documents. I know it's completely unreadable, the little circles, but it's the big circle that matters. Society wants to make choices about research. This was a 2009 report in the EU. So that's what I'm looking at, is this world where what's the impact the public engagement has, and for those of us involved in public engagement, is our goal to change science itself. So I said in the title that this is an empirical test. I am part of a large research project in the United States called the Center for Research on Programmable Plant Systems, CROPS. The acronym is not accidental. This is a collaboration between plant scientists, computer scientists, and engineers, and social scientists. It's a multi-institutional grant. Cornell is where I work, is the lead institution, but it involves the University of Illinois, the University of Arizona, Tuskegee University, Boyce Thompson Institute, which is a plant science research institute. I think the Colorado State logo got added after I put this slide together, so it's there. I'll tell you in a minute what CROPS is about, but first, I'd like you to answer a little survey. So you can either use your phones to the QR code or pollev.com/bvlewin. Sorry for the awkward thing. If you could talk to a plant, what would you tell it? It may ask you to register, just skip that. You don't need to tell us who you are. It'll ask you for your name or something. I just want to make sure that it's working. Is somebody able to enter? And has somebody signal me when you've been able to enter something? Okay. Sometimes I forget to push the on button. So it's working. Okay, good. I'll let you keep working on that while I move on to talking and explaining. So CROPS is designed to do some basic or discovery science about how plants communicate. It's about how do plants tell their roots to pick up more water, that it's dry. How do plants recognize when they need more nitrogen and to take that up from the soil around them? How can the plants signal to farmers? Now we get to the application. Here's where there's just no distinction between the basic and the applied. How can they tell farmers, hey, apply more water, or apply more nitrogen, or apply less nitrogen? Exactly how do those signals manifest? What do the plants do? And is it possible that we could communicate back with the plants? Could we tell them, for example, hey, it's going to be a dry week. You might want to conserve your water. So that means there has to be two-way communication. And to do that, again, we need to know a lot more than we know about how plants communicate and how signals move about and so on. One of my colleagues calls it roots to shoots communication. This work is being done in agriculturally important crops: corn or maize, tomato, soy, sweet potato. Again, it could choose many topics, but they chose ones that are agriculturally important to do this basic research in. It's part of why I have that piece in the SciPep brochure in our bags about saying I really don't distinguish between basic and applied, because I can't tell you whether this project is basic or applied. It is both and all of them and everything in between. I said there's computer scientists, there's big data going on, you see modeling up there in the corner, there are roboticists involved, they have a robotic worm that will burrow underneath in order to figure out what some of the signals are and so on. So I'm working with a hypothesis that if we do good science, then the science, or discovery science, will be better. If we do good public engagement, then the science itself will be better. So, John, I think that's my goal. John Besley, you're actually both in the same line there. John Besley, I think that's my goal, is to get scientists to act differently as a result of public engagement. On the next slide, John, I'll get to John Falk. Is that a goal, John? Does that count? I don't mean this. I mean the wanting scientists to behave differently. We've done a lot of work. Everybody in this room practically has done work on the impact of science communication and public engagement on learners, on communities, on different public audiences. But the claim I'm making is a stronger one. The claim I'm making is that true multidimensional public engagement will have an impact on the science itself. We will change knowledge as a result, the knowledge base as a result of public engagement. Now, there are some possibilities about what I might mean by that. I could mean that there's a change of attitude among the science community about their willingness to hear from the public. It could mean we're looking at changes in scientific institutions, for example, better training, the need for better training for scientists to be better communicators. But I'm going to push beyond those. I want that hard case. I want change in scientific or natural knowledge about the natural world itself, change in the science itself. Now, there are examples. There are some anecdotal ones. The probably easiest one is that until the 1980s, almost all of the knowledge that we had about heart disease was about heart disease in men. It wasn't in the US, it wasn't until there was political pressure from the feminist movement, forced the National Institutes of Health to start doing research on heart disease in women, who not only suffer heart disease, but it actually manifests in different ways. A heart attack in a woman isn't the same as a heart attack in a man in terms of the warning signals and so on. So there was real new knowledge that was created. In that case, it was political engagement, but it's a form of public engagement. So we actually have some sort of new knowledge there. The question is, can I show other ways that knowledge, especially in a project that's discovery focused, is changed by public engagement? But I have some problems in this research. What does science will be better mean? Am I talking about research outcomes? Am I talking about project management? Am I talking about public responses? And I also have, for anybody who is a natural scientist or any kind of scientist here, a problem. I don't have a control, right? I don't have another research project right alongside doing exactly the same kind of plant science, computer science, engineering research, but doing no public engagement. So this is a tricky thing to say. we're trying to decide, am I talking about science as knowledge, or science as a process, or science as a set of institutions, different meanings of the word science. The way we're going about this is that we're embedding social scientists in the project. There are 5 research themes. I think I forgot to say, this is for 5 years, you get $5 million a year, so it's $25 million, and unless you screw up, you get renewed for another 5 years. So it's a $50 million project over 10 years. Big project, multi-institutional. There are 5 research themes. 4 of them are technical. The 5th one is called Social and Ethical Issues in Digital Biology, where we're looking at variety of social and ethical issues, some like privacy, what happens when you have drones flying over fields to pick up signals from these gene-edited plants, privacy for the people who are, issues about the people working in the fields. This requires, doing this work would require massive internet access. The United States has terrible broadband access in rural areas where farms are. That may actually have contributed to the results of our election a week ago. Oops, hold on. So there's a bunch of issues we can be looking at, both within the science itself, among the scientists themselves, and in the general public. Obviously, to do this takes to do the research takes a lot of people. I'm just flopping their names up there just to acknowledge that the work I'm talking about is not just me. There's a whole team of people, other senior researchers, other postdocs, other graduate students, other staff members who are contributing to this. So how are we going about this? Well, we're starting by looking at what kinds of visions are there of plant bioengineering. One particular form of plant bioengineering is GMOs. We can see on the one side, on the I guess left side, the stereotypic scientist, almost stereotypic scientist. She's got a white coat, she's got holding test tubes. Okay, it's a she, so it's not stereotypical, but she's got corn growing next to her, and it's the same beautiful, pretty little colors as the sunflowers that are next to her, and so on. And of course, the other photo is a different vision of what GMOs are. Both of those are visions of what GMOs are. And when I talk about visions, here's the one slide of theory. I'm drawing on the work of my colleague, Steve Hilgartner at Cornell, who talks about vanguard visions. What is the imaginary, the socio-technical imaginary that researchers or publics or anybody has about a new project? How does that get co-produced? He looks specifically at the vanguard, the people on the edge, the people who are leading. In this project, as you'll see, we're also looking a little bit at the non-vanguard. But you're asking about what kinds of ethical questions are raised, regulatory issues, what kinds of policy concerns are there. And I won't go through a lot of detail on methods, but this involves participant observation, reading the documents, research proposals, policy presentations, finding out what venture capital is interested in, doing some public opinion surveys, doing community-based research with community meetings and so forth. The initial visions that we saw, this is the initial vision that CROPS had. Susan McCooch on the top, she's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, an internationally known rice geneticist. She was the founding director. She's now retired, and Abe Strook is the director. He's a chemical engineer, particularly interested in fluid dynamics, and therefore in how signals flow within the plants. But again, leading this large multidisciplinary team. Don't worry too much about the details, but if you can see it in the black circle in the middle, it says build, test, learn, design. Are there any engineers in the room? None? Is that what you learned in engineering school? Build, test, learn, design? This is the classic engineering circle that you work around in that circle. So built into the initial vision of this discovery science is the engineering that has to go into it. Over the years, the vision has evolved. Again, I won't go through all the details, but you'll see this notion of Internet of Living Things and different ways to try to explain how the plants and the robotics and so forth are interconnecting. Here's where we are now. We have, the vision is that crops is opening a dialogue with plants. Notice that there are two parts of that. Understanding the living world. That sounds like discovery science. Empowering a future of sustainable, resilient, and nutrient-rich crops. That sounds a lot more applied. Those two things are there. We're focused specifically on nitrogen and water. There's actually an entirely separate $50 million project looking at phosphorus. How did we get there? The social scientists, as embedded researchers, we led them through lots of discussions about visions. We did word clouds. The whole group gets together from around the country once a year. We have big collective meetings and so on. A lot of work by a lot of people in the project, not just on the science, but on thinking about how we teach people about the science and what curriculums would look like, worrying about how we work in teams, and thinking about inclusion. We have a scientific and an industrial advisory board. Again, that mix of both. We have knowledge transfer and partnerships and so on. And we have done some particular public engagement studies or studies of the public. We did a big national survey about 1.5 years ago. Again, I'm not going to show you details of it, just to say that we did it. It was the highest quality of national survey in terms of representativeness and so on. We've also surveyed students, and we're starting to do some more focused surveys. The only interesting thing I'll show you in this one is on the bottom row. How will using gene editing for new plants and crops affect social inequality? Students have a much higher expectation that it will decrease inequality. They're much more optimistic than the rest of us. We have done traditional public engagement activities. We have Science IRL is a YouTube series about science produced by Molly Edwards, who's actually a PhD graduate from Cornell. Well, no, undergraduate Cornellian, PhD from Harvard, but she's become a science communicator and runs a YouTube channel. Yesterday, I think Knox presented something about black botanists. There's a black scientists exhibit that the plant science community circulates. We've helped sponsor that. We do traditional things in schools. There was a big event on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., where we had 600 people come by. We went to, here's where we're getting to the non-vanguard. We went to the slow foods movement called Terra Madre in Italy a couple of months ago. I wouldn't say we, a couple of the grad students and one of our staff went. To hear from people who are not part of the vanguard. And we asked them, if you could talk to a plant, what would you ask it? And there's all kinds of things there. Let's see if I can read them from here. Grow, make me a mac and cheese. But it asks about whether you're thirsty. Why are your leaves brown? Some of the things that it asked are the things that we're trying to ask. And now, if this works, here are some of the things you said. Oh no, let's see. I have to change screens. You can't see it. All right, we're running out of time, so I won't go back to it. Later on, I'll figure out how to show you what you all said. Sorry about that. That was the one piece of technology we forgot to check on. Where we're at now is, as I wind up, is that social science is embedded in the project. I think we've had some changes. We did a visit with some farm workers who cross the US border every day to work in the fields in Arizona. It was led by Christian Salazar de Leon, who's in the far left, upper left corner. He was actually in the Slow Foods picture too, so this photo is not accurate. The other one is what he looks like. Christian is a technical scientist. He's working on optogenetics, trying to engineer genes that will respond to light signals. But he's also trying to do that in a way that will serve the community that he considers himself a part of. And that he said, there are lots of features of the plants that I could work on, lots of genes I could work on. I want to work on the ones that are important to my community. That's an anecdote of how we're changing, so on. But I still have no control group. I still have no clear measure of what counts as better, or therefore what will count as success, as John Falk reminded us yesterday. So I'm still trying to test this hypothesis that doing discovery science communication can actually change science itself. Thank you very much.